Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Reed Garrison had built his life like he built his construction empire, with precision, dedication, and an unforgiving attention to detail. At 35, he commanded respect in the small Montana town of Millbrook, where his company had erected half the buildings standing today. His calloused hands told the story of a man who'd climbed from nothing, starting as a day laborer at 16 after his father abandoned the family. The Garrison household on Maple Street appeared picture-perfect from the outside. A two-story colonial with white picket fences, maintained gardens, and 2 luxury vehicles in the driveway. Inside, Reed's wife Amy moved through their morning routine with practiced efficiency, preparing breakfast while their 4-year-old daughter Sophie played with her dolls in the living room. Amy Garrison, née Phillips, had been the town's golden girl, homecoming queen, valedictorian, and the daughter of the bank president. Her marriage to Reed 7 years ago had raised eyebrows among Millbrook's elite, but Reed's success had gradually earned their grudging acceptance. Amy's blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and her smile radiant when others were watching. "Daddy, look!" Sophie ran to Reed, clutching a crayon drawing of their family. In the child's innocent artwork, the 3 figures stood hand in hand under a rainbow. Reed knelt down, his steel gray eyes softening as he examined his daughter's creation. "That's beautiful, princess. You're getting better every day." "I'm going to give it to Mrs. Henderson at school," Sophie announced proudly. Amy barely glanced up from her phone as she responded. "That's nice, sweetheart." "Reed, don't forget I have book club tonight." Reed nodded, though something in Amy's tone struck him as odd. She'd been having a lot of book club meetings lately, often returning home after midnight with the faint scent of wine and something else he couldn't quite identify. After breakfast, Reed watched from his truck as Amy dropped Sophie off at Millbrook Elementary. His daughter skipped toward the building, her backpack bouncing with each step. Amy remained in her car for several minutes after Sophie disappeared through the school doors, typing frantically on her phone with an expression Reed had never seen before, a mixture of excitement and guilty pleasure. Reed's construction site was buzzing with activity when he arrived. His foreman, Danny Torres, approached with the day's reports. Danny had worked for Reed for 8 years, having started as a grunt laborer like Reed himself once was. Where Reed was calculated and methodical, Danny was impulsive and hot-headed, but his loyalty was absolute. "Boss, we've got a problem with the Morrison project," Danny said, his weathered face creased with concern. "The electrical contractor's running behind, and Mrs. Morrison is threatening to withhold payment." Reed reviewed the paperwork with his characteristic thoroughness. "Get Mike Patterson on the phone. If he can't meet our timeline, we'll find someone who can. I don't accept excuses." This philosophy had made Reed successful, but it had also made him enemies. In business, he was known for his unforgiving nature. Contractors who disappointed him once never got a second chance. Personal relationships, he'd always believed, should operate on the same principles. Around noon, Reed's phone buzzed with a text from Amy. "Sophie had a little accident at school. Nothing serious, just picked her up early. She's fine." Reed immediately called the school to check on his daughter. The secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, seemed surprised by his call. "Oh, Mr. Garrison, I thought you knew. Your wife picked Sophie up about an hour ago. The nurse said she had a fall on the playground." "What kind of fall?" Reed's voice carried an edge that made several workers nearby stop and look. "I'm not sure of the details. You might want to speak with Nurse Bennett when you pick up Sophie's things tomorrow." Reed tried calling Amy, but it went straight to voicemail. He left the construction site immediately, his mind racing with worry and something else, a nagging suspicion that had been growing stronger over the past few weeks. The house was eerily quiet when Reed arrived home. He found Amy in the kitchen, looking unusually flustered as she cleaned dishes that appeared to already be clean. "Where's Sophie?" he demanded. Amy's hand trembled slightly as she set down a plate. "She's napping. Poor thing was exhausted after her fall." Reed took the stairs 2 at a time, finding Sophie curled up in her bed with her favorite stuffed elephant. Her left arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, and there was a small bruise on her forehead that made Reed's jaw clench with protective fury. "Princess," he whispered, gently shaking her awake. "Tell Daddy what happened at school." Sophie's blue eyes, so much like his own, filled with confusion and fear. "Mommy said not to talk about it. She said it would make people mad." "You can tell me anything, sweetheart." Daddy won't get mad at you. I wasn't on the swings, Daddy. I was in the bathroom when the big kids came in. They pushed me down and laughed when I cried. Reed felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Sophie had never lied to him before, and her story directly contradicted what Amy had told both him and the school. More troubling was Amy's instruction for Sophie to remain silent, a detail that sent warning bells screaming in Reed's mind. That evening, Amy claimed her book club had been canceled and stayed home, but she remained glued to her phone throughout dinner. When Reed tried to discuss Sophie's injury, Amy's responses were evasive and contradictory. Kids fall all the time, Reed. You're overreacting. She said she wasn't on the swings. Amy's face flushed. 4-year-olds get confused. She probably forgot. But Reed knew his daughter, and Sophie didn't forget details like that. As he tucked Sophie into bed that night, she whispered something that would haunt him for days to come. Daddy, why does Mommy go to Uncle Tyler's house when she says she's going to book club? Reed's blood turned to ice. Tyler Brennan was Amy's former high school boyfriend, recently divorced, and definitely not someone Amy had ever mentioned being in contact with. Yet Sophie spoke of him with the casual familiarity of a child who'd been there multiple times. As Amy slept beside him that night, Reed stared at the ceiling with the growing certainty that his perfect life was built on lies. Tomorrow, he would start digging for the truth. And when he found it, because he always found what he was looking for, there would be consequences that Amy couldn't even imagine. Reed Garrison had never been a man who forgave betrayal. In business, he destroyed competitors who tried to undercut him. With employees, one broken promise meant permanent termination. The same principles would apply to his marriage, but the consequences would be far more severe. Amy stirred beside him, murmuring something in her sleep that sounded like another man's name. Reed's hands clenched into fists as he began planning his investigation. He would gather evidence, understand the full scope of her deception, and then he would make both Amy and Tyler Brennan pay for their betrayal in ways they would never forget. The perfect facade was cracking, and beneath it, Reed could feel the familiar cold rage that had driven him to success beginning to build towards something much darker. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. Reed arrived at Millbrook Elementary before the morning bell, parking strategically where he could observe the drop-off area. He'd spent the sleepless night formulating a plan, and gathering intelligence was always the first step. Through his windshield, he watched Amy's white SUV pull up to the curb. Sophie emerged from the vehicle, but instead of her usual energetic skip toward the building, she walked slowly, favoring her injured arm. Reed's protective instincts flared as he noticed several children pointing and whispering. Amy remained in her car, engine running, phone pressed to her ear with an expression of barely contained excitement. After Amy drove away, Reed approached the school. Nurse Bennett, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, greeted him in her small office decorated with cheerful posters about hand-washing and healthy eating. Mr. Garrison, I'm glad you came. I wanted to discuss Sophie's incident yesterday. What exactly happened? Reed kept his voice level, though his jaw was tight. Nurse Bennett consulted her notes, frowning. According to the playground supervisor, Sophie was found crying in the bathroom with scrapes on her arm and a bump on her forehead. She claimed some older children had pushed her, but when your wife arrived to pick her up, the nurse paused, choosing her words carefully. Mrs. Garrison seemed very eager to leave. She insisted Sophie had fallen from the swings, even though Sophie was adamant that wasn't what happened. Reed's suspicions crystallized into certainty. Did my wife seem distracted? She kept checking her phone and seemed agitated when I suggested we should document the incident properly. She said you both would handle it at home. Nurse Bennett leaned forward, her voice dropping. Mr. Garrison, in my 20 years here, I've learned to trust children's accounts of what happens to them. Sophie was very clear about being bullied, not falling. Why didn't you call me directly? Your wife insisted she would inform you immediately. She's listed as the primary emergency contact. The nurse hesitated. There's something else. Sophie mentioned that the children who hurt her have done this before, but she said her mother told her not to tell anyone because it would cause problems. Reed felt the familiar cold rage building in his chest. Amy wasn't just betraying their marriage. She was actively putting their daughter at risk to maintain her deception. After leaving the school, Reed drove to his construction site, but his mind was elsewhere. He called his lawyer, Frank Morrison, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who'd handled Reed's business contracts for years. "Frank, I need some advice about a personal matter. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to investigate potential adultery, what would be the best approach?" Frank's voice carried the caution of a man who'd seen too many ugly divorces. "Hypothetically, you'd want documented evidence. Photos, financial records, communication logs. Montana's a no-fault divorce state, but custody arrangements can be influenced by evidence of neglect or endangerment. What about hiring an investigator? I know someone reliable. Lila Cross, former FBI, now runs a private investigation firm in Billings. She's expensive but thorough." Reed made the call immediately. Lila Cross had a voice like gravel and a reputation for uncovering secrets that people thought were buried forever. They arranged to meet the following day. That afternoon, Reed implemented phase 1 of his investigation. He installed tracking software on the family computer and placed a small GPS device in Amy's car while she showered. If Amy was deceiving him, he would document every lie, every secret meeting, every moment of betrayal. At dinner, Reed observed Amy with new eyes. She picked at her food, constantly checking her phone, and answered Sophie's questions with distracted half-responses. When Sophie asked if they could go to the park this weekend, Amy snapped. "Not everything is about what you want, Sophie. Sometimes adults have important things to do." Reed intervened before Sophie could start crying. "We'll go to the park, princess. Daddy promises." Amy shot him a look of irritation. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Reed. You work every weekend." "My priorities are changing," Reed replied, his tone carrying a subtle warning that Amy was too self-absorbed to catch. That night, Amy claimed another book club meeting had been scheduled. She dressed carefully, too carefully for discussing literature, applying makeup and perfume with the attention of a woman preparing for a romantic encounter. "Don't wait up," she said, avoiding Reed's eyes. "These discussions can run late." After Amy left, Reed activated his laptop and watched the GPS tracker's signal move across the digital map of Millbrook. Instead of heading toward downtown where the book club supposedly met, Amy drove directly to the residential area near the lake, specifically to Deer Creek Road, where Tyler Brennan lived. Reed had done his research on Tyler during the long, sleepless hours of the previous night. Tyler Brennan, 33, worked as a physical therapist at the Regional Medical Center. Recently divorced after his wife discovered he'd been having affairs throughout their marriage. A man with a pattern of seducing married women, feeding on the excitement of forbidden relationships. Through his binoculars, Reed watched Amy's SUV park in Tyler's driveway. The house was isolated, surrounded by trees, with the nearest neighbor a quarter-mile away. Perfect for secret meetings. Reed's phone buzzed with a text from Amy. "Book club is great tonight. Discussing Pride and Prejudice. Probably won't be home until midnight." The casual lie sent fresh waves of fury through Reed's system. He photographed the text, then took pictures of Amy's car in Tyler's driveway, noting the timestamp on his camera. Evidence was power, and power would determine the outcome of this war. As Reed drove home, his mind was already working on the next phase of his plan. Exposing the affair would be easy, but simply ending his marriage wasn't enough. Amy and Tyler had endangered his daughter, lied repeatedly, and shown no remorse for their betrayal. They deserved consequences that would extend far beyond a divorce court. Back home, Reed checked on Sophie, who was sleeping peacefully with her bandaged arm cradled against her stuffed elephant. His daughter's innocent trust in him was absolute, and he would not fail to protect her, even if it meant protecting her from her own mother. Reed spent the rest of the evening researching Tyler Brennan's background, employment history, and social connections. Every person had vulnerabilities, pressure points that could be exploited by someone patient and ruthless enough to find them. Tyler's divorce records revealed gambling debts, a tendency toward violence when drinking, and a history of workplace complaints from female colleagues. Amy returned home at 12:47 a.m., reeking of wine and another man's cologne. She moved quietly through the house, but Reed was awake, lying still in their bed as she slipped in beside him. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she carried herself with the guilty satisfaction of a woman who believed she was getting away with the perfect crime. As Amy's breathing settled into sleep, Reed made a silent promise to his daughter and to himself. He would gather every piece of evidence, understand every aspect of their deception, And then he would destroy both Amy and Tyler so completely that they would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider betraying Reed Garrison. The foundation of his marriage was cracking, but Reed was already planning to bring down the entire structure and everyone inside it. Chapter 3: The Network of Lies. Reed met Lila Cross at a coffee shop in Billings, an hour's drive from Millbrook. The private investigator was a lean woman in her 40s with sharp features and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings. Her handshake was firm, professional, and her questions were direct. "How long have you suspected the affair?" Lila asked, pulling out a digital recorder. 3 days, but the signs have been building for months. Late nights, unexplained absences, secretive phone calls. Reed slid a folder across the table. "I've documented what I can, but I need professional confirmation and a complete picture of their relationship." Lila reviewed Reed's preliminary evidence, the GPS tracking data, photographs, and timeline of Amy's lies. Her expression remained neutral, but Reed caught a glimmer of approval in her eyes. "You've done good work for an amateur. Most people let emotions cloud their judgment, but you're thinking like an investigator." She leaned back in her chair. "I can have definitive proof within a week, but my services aren't cheap. Surveillance, background checks, electronic monitoring. It runs about $5,000 for a comprehensive investigation. Money isn't an issue. I want everything: their communication records, meeting patterns, how long this has been going on, and whether there are other people involved." "Other people?" Reed's voice hardened. "My daughter mentioned visiting Tyler's house multiple times. If Amy has been taking Sophie there during her affairs, that changes everything." Lila's expression darkened. "Child endangerment is a serious accusation. If we can prove that, it'll significantly impact custody proceedings." "I'm not interested in custody proceedings," Reed said quietly. "I want complete custody, and I want both of them to understand that betraying me comes with consequences they'll never forget." Something in Reed's tone made Lila study him more carefully. "Mr. Garrison, I need to be clear about my boundaries. I gather evidence, document facts, and provide legally admissible proof. I don't participate in revenge schemes or anything that might cross legal lines." "I understand completely. I just want the truth." After leaving the meeting with Lila, Reed drove to his construction site, where Danny Torres was arguing with a supplier over delayed materials. Reed's arrival immediately shifted the dynamic. The supplier's demanding tone became apologetic when he recognized Reed. "Problems?" Reed asked Danny after the supplier left. "Same old bullshit. Promises they can't keep, excuses when things go wrong." Danny spat into the dirt. "Sometimes I think the only way to get respect is to make people afraid of disappointing you." Reed nodded, filing Danny's comment away for future consideration. "How's your evening schedule this week?" "Pretty open. Sarah's working late shifts at the hospital, so I'm basically free until midnight most nights." "Good. I might need some help with a personal project." "Off the books." Danny's loyalty to Reed was absolute. Reed had saved Danny's job 3 years ago when the man's drinking had gotten out of control, and Danny had never forgotten the debt. More importantly, Danny had a talent for intimidation that could be useful under the right circumstances. That afternoon, Reed visited Sophie's school again, this time speaking with her teacher, Mrs. Peterson. The young woman was clearly concerned about Sophie's recent behavior changes. "She's been more withdrawn lately, less participative in group activities. Yesterday's incident seems to have affected her more than typical playground conflicts." Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice. "I'm also concerned about some things Sophie has mentioned about home life." "What kinds of things?" "She talks about Mommy's friend Tyler quite frequently. She describes spending time at his house, which wouldn't be unusual, except she seems confused about why these visits are supposed to be secret." Mrs. Peterson chose her words carefully. "Sophie mentioned that her mother told her not to talk about Tyler because it would make Daddy sad." Reed felt his control slipping, but he maintained his composed exterior. "Has she mentioned anything else about these visits?" She described Tyler's house in detail: the big fish tank, the dog named Brutus, the room with exercise equipment. The specificity suggests she spent considerable time there. After leaving the school, Reed conducted his own surveillance mission. He parked across from Tyler Brennan's house, using high-powered binoculars to study the property. The details Sophie had mentioned were all visible: a large aquarium in the front window, a German shepherd in the backyard, and through the basement windows, he could see exercise equipment. The realization that Amy had been bringing Sophie to her lover's house during their affairs filled Reed with a cold, calculating rage that went beyond personal betrayal. This was child endangerment, manipulation, and a violation of everything he held sacred about protecting his daughter. Reed's phone rang as he sat watching Tyler's house. Lila Cross's voice was crisp and professional. "I've got preliminary results. Your wife's phone records show daily communication with Tyler Brennan going back for months. Texts, calls, even video chats. I've also confirmed that she visited his residence yesterday during the time she claimed to be at book club. Any evidence of my daughter being involved? I'm working on that angle. Tyler's neighbors might have seen a child at the property. I'll have more details tomorrow." That evening, Reed implemented the next phase of his investigation. While Amy was upstairs getting ready for another book club meeting, he accessed their family computer and reviewed her browser history. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions. Amy had been researching divorce attorneys, child custody laws, and how to establish grounds for claiming Reed was an unfit father. She'd also been communicating with Tyler through multiple platforms: email, social media, and encrypted messaging apps. The most damning discovery was a draft email Amy had written but never sent. "Tyler, I think Reed is getting suspicious. We need to be more careful about our meetings. I told Sophie not to mention your house, but she's only 4 and sometimes forgets. Maybe we should stop bringing her there until I can figure out how to handle this situation. I love you, and I can't wait until we can be together permanently. Just a few more months of pretending, and then we'll have everything we want." Reed photographed the email, added it to his growing evidence file, and felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Amy wasn't just betraying their marriage. She was planning to destroy his relationship with his daughter as part of her scheme to start a new life with Tyler. When Amy came downstairs, dressed elegantly for another book club, Reed was waiting in the living room with a glass of wine and his laptop. "Have a wonderful evening discussing literature," he said, his tone perfectly pleasant. Amy paused at the door, studying his face with sudden wariness. "You seem different tonight." "Just reflecting on how much our relationship has changed lately. Amazing how people can live together for years and not really know each other." Amy's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the door handle. "I should go? The group is expecting me." "Of course. Wouldn't want to disappoint your friends." After Amy left, Reed called Danny Torres. "I need that favor we discussed. Are you available for some surveillance work?" "Absolutely, boss. What do you need?" "I want you to follow my wife tonight. Don't interfere, just observe and document. I need to know exactly what she's doing and how long she stays there." Danny's voice carried no judgment, only loyalty. "Consider it done." As Reed tucked Sophie into bed that night, his daughter asked the question that would determine the final scope of his revenge. "Daddy, when Mommy and Tyler get married, will I still live with you?" Reed felt the last of his restraint shatter. "What did you say, princess?" "Mommy said someday she and Tyler might get married, and then I would have 2 daddies. But I only want you to be my daddy." Reed held his daughter close, his mind already calculating the complete destruction of Amy and Tyler Brennan. They had involved an innocent child in their deception, planted ideas in her head about family structures that would never exist, and shown no consideration for the psychological damage they were inflicting. Tomorrow, Lila Cross would provide the final pieces of evidence he needed. Then Reed would begin the systematic destruction of 2 people who had made the fatal mistake of betraying Reed Garrison and threatening his relationship with his daughter. Amy and Tyler thought they were playing a game of deception and desire. They had no idea they were already trapped in Reed's web, and every move they made was only tightening the snare around their throats. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Lila Cross arrived at Reed's construction office with a comprehensive file that would change everything. The photographs were damning. Amy and Tyler embracing on his front porch, kissing passionately in his car, and most devastating of all, images of Sophie playing in Tyler's backyard while the adults disappeared into the house for hours. For months, Lila announced, spreading the evidence across Reed's desk. The affair started in January, shortly after Tyler's divorce was finalized. "Your wife has been at his house at least 3 times per week, often bringing your daughter." Reed studied each photograph with the methodical attention he applied to construction blueprints. "What about their communication?" "Hundreds of messages, increasingly intimate and planning-focused. They've discussed marriage, moving in together, and Tyler has been researching job opportunities in other states. Lila pulled out a thick folder. But here's the interesting part. Tyler Brennan has a history of targeting married women with children. His ex-wife's divorce filing mentions suspicious relationships with at least 2 other mothers from their daughter's school. He's done this before? It's his pattern. Seduce married women, create emotional dependence, then encourage them to leave their husbands. Usually, he loses interest once the women become available, but your wife seems different. The communications suggest genuine planning for a future together. Reed absorbed this information while calculating the implications. Tyler wasn't just an opportunistic predator. He was a serial destroyer of families, and Amy was his latest project. There's more, Lila continued. I've documented several instances where your wife lied to school officials about picking up Sophie early, taking her to Tyler's house during school hours. The school records show 18 unexplained absences in the past 4 months. Reed's jaw clenched. Sophie's academic and social development was being sacrificed for Amy's affair. What kind of legal exposure does this create? Child endangerment, custodial interference, educational neglect. A good attorney could make a strong case for supervised visitation only. Lila studied Reed's expression. But you're not thinking about attorneys, are you? I'm thinking about justice. That afternoon, Reed visited Frank Morrison's law office, but not for the conventional legal advice most men would seek. Frank had grown up in Millbrook's rougher neighborhoods before law school, and he understood that sometimes justice required creativity. Legally, you've got them cold, Frank said after reviewing Lila's evidence. Full custody, significant alimony protection, and Amy would be lucky to get supervised weekend visits. That's not enough. Frank leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. Reed, I've known you for 8 years. You're not a man who accepts partial victories, but whatever you're planning needs to be smart. Emotional decisions lead to legal complications. I'm not being emotional. I'm being strategic. That evening, Reed implemented phase 2 of his plan. He called Tyler Brennan directly. Tyler, this is Reed Garrison, Amy's husband. I think we need to talk. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 10 seconds. When Tyler finally spoke, his voice was strained. What do you want to talk about? My daughter mentions you quite often. She says you have a nice house, interesting fish tank. I was thinking maybe we should meet, get to know each other better. I don't think Amy hasn't mentioned. Amy doesn't know I'm calling. This is between us men. Reed's tone was perfectly friendly, almost conversational. How about tomorrow evening? I could stop by after work, maybe around 7. Tyler's panic was audible. Look, Mr. Garrison, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. No misunderstanding at all. Sophie speaks very highly of you, and any friend of my family deserves my personal attention. Reed paused, letting the implications sink in. I'll see you tomorrow, Tyler. Looking forward to our conversation. Reed hung up before Tyler could respond, then immediately called Amy. Sweetheart, I'm planning to work late tomorrow night. Don't wait up for me. Amy's relief was obvious. Of course, honey. I might have book club anyway. Perfect. We'll both have productive evenings. That night, Reed met Danny Torres at a bar outside town limits. The establishment was frequented by construction workers, truckers, and men who understood that some conversations never happened. I need you to do some research on Tyler Brennan, Reed said, sliding a folder across the table. Address, vehicle information, daily routines. I want to know his schedule, his habits, his vulnerabilities. Danny studied the information with professional interest. This about your wife. Among other things. What kind of research are we talking about? Surveillance, background check, or something more interactive? Reed met Danny's eyes directly. Tyler Brennan has been destroying families for years. My family is just his latest target. I want him to understand that actions have consequences. Danny nodded slowly. I know some people who specialize in educational conversations. The kind that leave lasting impressions without creating legal complications. Set up a meeting. The next day, Reed visited Sophie's school one final time, ostensibly to discuss her academic progress, but actually to document the full extent of Amy's neglect. Mrs. Peterson was visibly concerned about Sophie's recent behavioral changes. She's been having nightmares, asking confused questions about family structures, and showing signs of anxiety about disappointing adults, the teacher explained. Yesterday, she asked if she was going to get in trouble for talking about Tyler. When I asked who Tyler was, She said he was her mother's special friend, but it was supposed to be a secret. Reed felt his carefully controlled rage building towards something that would demand physical release. Has the school counselor been involved? We've been hesitant to intervene without clear evidence of a problem, but Sophie's emotional state has definitely deteriorated. If there are family issues that might be affecting her. There are family issues, Reed said quietly. But they're being resolved. That evening, Reed drove to Tyler Brennan's house with a toolbox in his truck and a plan that would send a message Tyler would never forget. The house was isolated, exactly as Reed had observed during his surveillance. Tyler's car was in the driveway, and lights were on throughout the residence. Reed parked down the street and approached on foot, using the cover of trees to reach Tyler's backyard. Through the windows, he could see Tyler pacing nervously, constantly checking his phone, clearly debating whether to flee or face the confrontation Reed had promised. The decision was made for him when Reed knocked on the front door. Tyler answered wearing gym clothes, his face pale with fear and guilt. "Mr. Garrison, I really don't think this is a good idea." "Relax, Tyler. I just want to talk." Reed stepped past Tyler into the house, his presence immediately dominating the space. "Nice place. I can see why my daughter enjoys visiting here." Tyler's hands were shaking as he closed the door. "Look, I think there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding at all. You've been fucking my wife and involving my daughter in your deception. I understand the situation perfectly." Tyler backed toward the living room, his athletic build suddenly seeming insignificant compared to Reed's construction-hardened frame and cold determination. "I need you to understand something, Tyler," Reed continued, his voice conversational despite the menace in his eyes. "I'm not here to hurt you. That would be too simple, too quick. I'm here to explain what's going to happen to your life." Tyler's back hit the wall, and Reed stepped closer, invading his personal space with the calculated intimidation of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "Tomorrow, you're going to call Amy and end whatever relationship you think you have. You're going to tell her you've realized that destroying families isn't your calling anymore, and that you're moving away from Millbrook permanently. You can't just. I can do whatever I want, Tyler. The question is whether you're smart enough to cooperate or stupid enough to fight me." Reed pulled out his phone and showed Tyler several photographs from Lila's investigation. 4 months of evidence. Adultery, child endangerment, custodial interference. But that's just the legal ammunition. Reed's smile was coldly predatory. "I know about your gambling debts, your drinking problem, your history of violence against women. I know about the complaints at your workplace, your ex-wife's restraining order, and the medical board investigation that was quietly dropped after you agreed to undergo counseling." Tyler's face went ashen. "How did you? I know everything about you, Tyler. And soon, everyone else will too." Reed stepped back, giving Tyler space to breathe, but no illusion of escape. "You have 24 hours to disappear from my wife's life in this town. If you're still here after that, I'll make sure every person in Millbrook knows exactly what kind of man you are. Your employer, your neighbors, your family, your ex-wife's attorney. Everyone will receive detailed documentation of your predatory behavior." That's extortion. That's consequences," Reed corrected. "You made the choice to target my family. Now you get to live with what that choice costs you." Reed moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Tyler, if you ever contact my daughter again, in any way, for any reason, I'll kill you. That's not a threat. It's a promise from a father who loves his child more than he fears prison." As Reed drove home, he felt the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Tyler would run. Men like him always did when confronted with real consequences. But Amy's punishment would be far more creative, far more devastating, and far more permanent. The real war was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Collapse of Illusions. Tyler's phone call to Amy came at 6:47 the next morning. Reed listened from the kitchen as Amy answered, her voice still thick with sleep. "Tyler, why are you calling so early?" Amy's tone shifted from groggy confusion to mounting panic as Tyler delivered his rehearsed goodbye. "What do you mean you're leaving? Leaving for where?" Reed couldn't hear Tyler's responses, but Amy's side of the conversation told the complete story. Her voice climbed to near hysteria as she realized her fantasy future was disintegrating. "You can't just disappear. We have plans. We talked about this." Amy was pacing now, her voice carrying from the kitchen through the entire house. "Tyler, please, just tell me what's wrong. We can fix this." The call ended abruptly, and Reed heard the distinct sound of Amy's phone hitting the wall. When she appeared in the kitchen moments later, her face was streaked with tears and twisted with desperate confusion. "Everything all right?" Reed asked, not looking up from his coffee and morning newspaper. Amy stared at him with sudden suspicion, her emotional state making her more perceptive than usual. Tyler's leaving town. He says he needs a fresh start." "That's unfortunate." Sophie seemed to enjoy his company. Amy's eyes widened at the casual mention of Sophie's connection to Tyler. What do you know about Sophie and Tyler?" Reed folded his newspaper deliberately, meeting Amy's frightened gaze with cold satisfaction. "I know everything, Amy. The question is what you're going to do about it." Amy's face cycled through a dozen emotions: fear, guilt, defiance, and finally desperate calculation. "I don't know what you think you know, but—" "For months," Reed interrupted. 18 school absences, hundreds of text messages, multiple overnight visits while claiming book club meetings. He stood slowly, his presence filling the kitchen with menace. "Did you really think I was too stupid to notice, or too weak to investigate?" Amy backed toward the counter, her hands shaking as she grasped for some explanation that might salvage her situation. "Reed, please let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You betrayed our marriage, endangered our daughter, and planned to destroy my relationship with Sophie to build a new life with a serial predator." Reed's voice remained calm, but the fury beneath was unmistakable. "The only question now is how much you're going to lose." Amy's survival instincts kicked in, and her tears transformed into angry defiance. "You can't prove anything. Tyler was just a friend, and if you try to make it into something else—" Reed placed his phone on the kitchen counter and activated a voice recording app. "Please continue. Tell me more about your friendship with Tyler." The recording device broke through Amy's last illusion of control. She realized that every word could be used against her in court, that Reed wasn't just discovering her affair, he was systematically documenting her self-destruction. "You bastard," she whispered. "You planned this whole conversation." "I planned everything, Amy, including what happens next." Reed retrieved a manila envelope from his briefcase and placed it on the counter. "Divorce papers. You'll find the terms very specific. I get full custody of Sophie, the house, and all marital assets. You get nothing except the guarantee that I won't pursue criminal charges for child endangerment." Amy's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Her face went white as she read the detailed evidence list: photographs, communication records, financial documentation, and witness statements. You can't just. I can do exactly this. Your choices are simple. Sign the papers and disappear quietly, or fight me and lose everything including your freedom." Reed leaned against the counter, completely relaxed despite the devastation he was inflicting. "But let me be clear about one thing. Regardless of what you choose, you will never have unsupervised access to Sophie again." Amy's legs gave out, and she slumped into a kitchen chair. "She's my daughter too." "She was your daughter. Then you decided Tyler Brennan was more important than her safety, her education, and her emotional well-being." Reed's voice carried no trace of sympathy. "You made your choice, Amy. Now you live with the consequences." The sound of Sophie's feet on the stairs interrupted their confrontation. Amy quickly wiped her tears and tried to compose herself, but the damage was already visible. Sophie appeared in the kitchen wearing her favorite purple pajamas, clutching her stuffed elephant. "Why is Mommy crying?" Sophie asked, moving instinctively toward Reed instead of Amy. "Mommy's just having a difficult morning, Princess," Reed said, lifting Sophie into his arms. "How about we make pancakes while Mommy gets ready for work?" Amy watched this interaction with growing realization that she'd already lost the most important battle. Sophie's natural movement toward Reed, her comfort in his presence, and her wariness around Amy's emotional state revealed the truth. In her pursuit of Tyler, Amy had damaged her relationship with her own daughter. After Amy left for work, Reed called Frank Morrison to initiate the legal proceedings. The divorce papers were already prepared, the evidence documented, and the strategy finalized. Amy would have no realistic option except surrender. "She'll probably hire an attorney," Frank warned. "Try to fight for some kind of custody arrangement." "Let her try? The evidence is overwhelming, and I doubt any lawyer will want to defend someone who endangered a child for an affair." Reed's next call was to Danny Torres. "Tyler's leaving town today. I want to make sure he actually goes. Consider it done, boss. If he tries to change his mind or contact your wife, he'll get a reminder about why that's a bad idea. That afternoon, Reed received an unexpected visitor at his construction site. Amy's father, Robert Phillips, arrived in his Mercedes looking every inch the bank president who'd never quite approved of his daughter's marriage to a blue-collar contractor. "Reed, we need to discuss this situation with Amy," Robert began, his tone carrying the authority of a man accustomed to controlling conversations. "What situation is that, Robert?" "Amy called me this morning, very upset, claiming you're threatening her with some kind of vendetta over a misunderstanding." Reed set down his tablet and gave Robert his complete attention. "Did Amy mention that she's been having an affair for 4 months? Or that she's been taking Sophie to her lover's house during school hours?" Robert's confident expression wavered. "I'm sure there's some explanation." "There is an explanation. Your daughter is a liar, an adulterer, and an unfit mother." Reed's tone was matter-of-fact, without anger or emotion. "I have documented evidence of everything, and tomorrow I'm filing for divorce with a demand for full custody." Robert Phillips was not accustomed to being spoken to with such directness, especially by someone he'd always considered socially inferior. "Now see here, Reed. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I discovered that your daughter has been planning to divorce me, take my child, and move to another state with a man who has a history of destroying families." Reed pulled out his phone and showed Robert several photographs from Lila's investigation. 4 months of evidence, including documentation of child endangerment. Robert stared at the images, his face growing pale as the reality of his daughter's situation became undeniable. "This is... Amy wouldn't. Amy did. The question is whether you're going to support her delusions or accept reality." Robert Phillips was a practical man who'd built his success on recognizing losing positions. After studying the evidence for several minutes, he looked up at Reed with something approaching respect. "What do you want from our family?" "I want Amy to disappear quietly and never interfere with my relationship with Sophie. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges or make this a public scandal that destroys your reputation in this town." Robert understood the implicit threat. A public trial involving his daughter's adultery and child endangerment would be devastating to his social and professional standing in Millbrook. "You're asking me to choose between my daughter and my granddaughter. I'm offering you the opportunity to choose wisely." Amy made her decision when she prioritized a sexual relationship over Sophie's well-being. Now everyone else gets to live with the consequences of her choices. That evening, Amy returned home to find her father waiting in the living room with Reed. The divorce papers were spread across the coffee table, and Robert's expression told her everything she needed to know. "Daddy, please tell me you're here to help," Amy said, her voice small and desperate. "I'm here to convince you to sign those papers," Robert replied quietly. "You've made mistakes that can't be fixed, and fighting Reed will only make things worse for everyone." Amy looked between the two men, realizing that her support system had evaporated. Tyler was gone, her father was siding with Reed, and she had no allies left in the battle for her daughter. "If I sign this, when do I get to see Sophie?" Reed's answer was swift and final. "You don't. Supervised visits might be possible eventually, but only if you prove that Sophie's welfare is more important to you than your own desires." Amy signed the papers with tears streaming down her face, her signature legally ending the marriage that had defined her adult life. As she packed her belongings that night, Reed watched from the doorway with cold satisfaction. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I don't know," Amy whispered. "Tyler's gone, my father's ashamed of me, and I have nowhere else." "You should have thought about that before you decided to betray your family." As Amy carried her suitcases to her car, Reed felt no sympathy, no regret, and no mercy. She had endangered his daughter and betrayed his trust, and now she would learn that actions have consequences. But Reed's revenge was far from complete. Tyler Brennan still needed to understand that running away wasn't enough to escape justice, and Amy would soon discover that losing her family was only the beginning of her punishment. Chapter 6. The Price of Betrayal. Reed received confirmation of Tyler's departure from Danny Torres at 8:15 p.m. He packed his car like a man running from a fire, Danny reported. Drove straight to the interstate, heading east toward Billings. Left his house key under the mat and a note for his landlord. Good. Any sign he tried to contact Amy before leaving? Nope. Looked like a man who got the message loud and clear. Reed felt satisfaction knowing Tyler had understood the implicit threat, but Tyler's escape was only temporary. Men like Tyler Brennan didn't change their patterns. They just found new hunting grounds. Eventually, Tyler would target another family, and when he did, Reed would be ready. Amy had spent her first night of freedom at a motel outside town, calling Reed repeatedly until he blocked her number. By the second day, she was desperate enough to appear at his construction site, looking haggard and desperate. "I need to see Sophie," she demanded, approaching Reed as he reviewed blueprints with his foreman. Reed looked up with mild annoyance, as if Amy were an unwelcome interruption rather than his former wife. "You signed away that right. She's still my daughter. You can't just keep her from me." The construction workers had stopped their activities to watch the confrontation. Reed was aware of their attention, and he used it strategically. "Amy, you made your choices. Tyler Brennan was more important to you than Sophie's safety or education. Now you get to live with those consequences." Reed's voice carried clearly across the construction site. "If you continue to harass me at my workplace, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Amy realized that her private shame was becoming public knowledge. The construction workers would spread this story throughout Millbrook, ensuring everyone knew why Amy Garrison had lost her family. "Please, Reed. I made mistakes, but I love Sophie. You love the idea of Sophie. But when it came time to protect her, you chose a sexual relationship with a married man instead." Reed turned back to his blueprints, dismissing Amy as if she no longer existed. "Danny, call security if Mrs. Phillips doesn't leave the premises immediately." Amy left, but not before Reed saw the calculation in her eyes. She was planning something, and Reed would need to stay ahead of whatever desperate scheme she might devise. That afternoon, Reed met with Lila Cross to discuss the next phase of his plan. The private investigator had been monitoring Tyler's movements and had disturbing news. Tyler's in Denver, and he's already joined a fitness center frequented by married couples. Old patterns die hard. Lila showed Reed photographs of Tyler chatting with various women at the gym. He's also been researching Amy's background, probably planning to reconnect once he thinks it's safe. Then we need to ensure he understands that it's never safe. Reed's plan for Tyler was more sophisticated than simple intimidation. He'd researched Tyler's new location, employment prospects, and social patterns. Tyler had taken a job at a Denver medical center, rented an apartment near the hospital, and was already establishing the routine that would allow him to target new victims. "I want you to prepare a comprehensive dossier on Tyler Brennan," Reed instructed Lila. "His history, his pattern of behavior, his criminal activities, everything. Then I want you to deliver copies to his new employer, his apartment complex management, and the parents' groups at every school in his neighborhood." Lila raised an eyebrow. "That's legal, but it's aggressive. You're essentially destroying his ability to rebuild his life anywhere. Tyler destroyed my family for his sexual gratification. Now he gets to understand what permanent consequences feel like." Reed's revenge against Tyler would be methodical and complete. Every time Tyler tried to establish himself in a new location, Reed would ensure his past followed him. Every job application, every romantic pursuit, every attempt at starting over would be contaminated by the truth about Tyler's predatory behavior. Meanwhile, Amy was discovering that her father's influence couldn't protect her from the social consequences of her choices. Robert Phillips had quietly let it be known throughout Millbrook's social circles that Amy was taking time to reflect on her life choices, but the truth was spreading faster than any official narrative. Amy's friends at the country club suddenly became unavailable for lunch dates. Her former book club members, the actual book club, not the fictional one she'd used as cover for her affairs, removed her from their group text. Within a week, Amy found herself completely isolated in a town where she'd once been social royalty. Reed watched Amy's social destruction with the same methodical satisfaction he'd felt watching Tyler flee. Both betrayers were learning that actions have consequences, but Reed wasn't finished with either of them. The real test came when Amy attempted to use Sophie as leverage for reconciliation. She appeared at Sophie's school during pickup time, hoping to see her daughter and potentially manipulate the situation to her advantage. Reed had anticipated this move and was waiting. "Mommy." Sophie ran toward Amy with the unfiltered joy of a child who didn't understand the complexities of adult betrayal. Amy knelt to embrace her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "I've missed you so much, baby." Reed approached calmly, his presence immediately changing the dynamic. Sophie looked between her parents with growing confusion as she sensed the tension. "Sophie, go wait in Daddy's truck," Reed instructed gently. "But I want to talk to Mommy." "You can talk to Mommy another time. Right now, Daddy needs to speak with her alone." Sophie reluctantly obeyed, leaving Amy and Reed facing each other in the school parking lot. Other parents were beginning to notice the confrontation, and Reed was again aware of his audience. "You can't keep her from me forever," Amy said, her voice carrying desperate determination. "I can keep her from you as long as you're a threat to her well-being," Reed replied. "And exposing her to your emotional instability qualifies as a threat." Amy's face twisted with fury. "I'm her mother. I have rights. You had rights. Then you chose Tyler Brennan over Sophie's safety. Rights have to be earned, Amy, and you haven't started earning yours back." Reed stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Amy could hear. "If you ever ambush Sophie at school again, I'll file for a restraining order. And unlike your father's quiet influence, a restraining order is public record. Everyone in town will know exactly why Amy Phillips Garrison can't be trusted around her own daughter." Amy realized she was trapped between her desperate need to see Sophie and the social destruction that would follow any legal action. Reed had crafted a situation where any move Amy made would only worsen her position. That night, Reed received an unexpected phone call from Tyler Brennan. "You destroyed my life." Tyler's voice was slurred with alcohol and thick with rage. "You destroyed your own life. I just made sure there were consequences. I lost my job, my apartment, everything. People look at me like I'm some kind of monster." Reed felt no sympathy. "You are a monster, Tyler. You target families, manipulate children, and destroy marriages for your own gratification. Now you get to live with everyone knowing who you really are." "This isn't over, Garrison. I know where you live, where your daughter goes to school." "Tyler," Reed interrupted, his voice carrying deadly calm. "If you ever threaten my daughter, I will hunt you down and kill you." That's not anger talking. It's a promise from a father who has nothing left to lose when it comes to protecting his child. The line went dead, but Reed knew Tyler would cause more trouble. Desperate men made desperate choices, and Tyler's threats suggested he was past rational decision-making. Reed called Danny Torres immediately. "I need you to reach out to those contacts we discussed. Tyler Brennan just threatened my daughter, and I want him to understand that threatening Reed Garrison's family is a fatal mistake." Danny's voice carried grim satisfaction. "I know some people in Denver who specialize in attitude adjustments. Tyler Brennan will get a very clear message about respecting boundaries." As Reed tucked Sophie into bed that night, his daughter asked the question that reminded him why his revenge was necessary. "Daddy, why can't I see Mommy anymore?" "Because Mommy made some choices that hurt our family, and Daddy needs to keep you safe while she learns to make better choices." "Will she ever learn?" Reed looked into his daughter's innocent blue eyes and felt the cold certainty that Amy would never learn, never change, and never prioritize Sophie's welfare over her own desires. "We'll see, Princess. But either way, Daddy will always protect you." Outside, storm clouds were gathering over Millbrook, but Reed felt the calm satisfaction of a man whose plans were working perfectly. Amy was isolated and powerless. Tyler was learning the price of predatory behavior, and Sophie was safe. The revenge was nearly complete, but Reed had one final lesson to teach both betrayers about the consequences of threatening his family. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 3 days after Tyler's threatening phone call, Reed received confirmation that his message had been delivered. Danny Torres called with the satisfaction of a job well done. "Your boy Tyler won't be making any more threats," Danny reported. "My Denver contacts had a very educational conversation with him in a hospital parking lot. He's currently sporting 2 broken fingers, a dislocated shoulder, and a new understanding of why threatening children is a bad life choice." Reed felt no sympathy for Tyler's condition. Did they make it clear this was connected to his threat against Sophie? Crystal clear. They also informed him that any future contact with you or your family, direct or indirect, would result in more permanent consequences. Reed's network of contacts extended far beyond Millbrook's borders. Years of construction work had connected him with people who understood that some problems required unofficial solutions. Tyler Brennan had just learned that Reed Garrison's reach was longer and more dangerous than he'd imagined. Meanwhile, Amy's situation had deteriorated beyond social isolation. Her father's attempts to help had been rebuffed, her former friends had abandoned her, and she'd been forced to take a minimum wage job at a grocery store in the next town over. The woman who'd once been Millbrook's princess was now ringing up groceries for people who whispered about her behind her back. Reed learned about Amy's circumstances through Millbrook's efficient gossip network, but he wasn't satisfied with her voluntary exile. Amy needed to understand that her punishment was permanent, not temporary, and that any attempt to rebuild her life would be met with swift consequences. The opportunity for final justice came when Amy made one last desperate play for sympathy. She contacted the local newspaper, claiming she was a victim of domestic abuse who'd been unfairly separated from her daughter. The journalist, a young woman named Jennifer Mason who'd recently moved to Millbrook, agreed to meet with Amy for an interview. Reed learned about the interview through Frank Morrison, who maintained contacts throughout the legal and media community. She's claiming you fabricated evidence against her, that the affair was emotional support during an abusive marriage, and that you're using your influence to keep her from her daughter. Reed smiled coldly. Perfect. Is the interview scheduled? Tomorrow afternoon at the newspaper office. Reed spent that evening preparing for Amy's final destruction. He called Lila Cross and requested copies of every piece of evidence they'd gathered, organized chronologically to tell the complete story of Amy's betrayal. He also contacted Mrs. Peterson, Nurse Bennett, and several other school officials who could testify to Sophie's condition during Amy's affair. The next morning, Reed arrived at the Millbrook Herald 30 minutes before Amy's scheduled interview. He found Jennifer Mason in a small office filled with stacks of newspapers and local community awards. Ms. Mason, I'm Reed Garrison. I understand you're planning to interview my ex-wife about our custody situation. Jennifer was a woman in her late 20s with the eager energy of a journalist looking for her first major story. Mr. Garrison, I appreciate you coming in, but journalistic integrity requires that I hear both sides before. That's exactly why I'm here, Reed interrupted, placing a thick folder on her desk. I want to make sure you have all the facts before Amy tells you her version of events. Jennifer opened the folder and began examining the photographs, communication records, and witness statements. Her expression shifted from professional skepticism to genuine shock as the scope of Amy's deception became clear. This is extensive, Jennifer said, studying photographs of Amy and Tyler with Sophie playing in the background. Your ex-wife brought your daughter to her lover's house. Repeatedly. For 4 months, while lying to school officials, me, and our daughter about where they were going. Reed's voice was matter-of-fact, letting the evidence speak for itself. My ex-wife is planning to tell you that I'm an abusive husband who fabricated evidence against her. I want you to understand the documented facts before she attempts to manipulate your sympathy. Jennifer continued reviewing the evidence, her journalist's instincts recognizing a story far more complex than a simple custody dispute. Mr. Garrison, this suggests systematic deception and child endangerment. Why hasn't this been prosecuted criminally? Because I chose to prioritize my daughter's privacy over public justice. But if Amy continues to spread lies about our situation, that could change. When Amy arrived for her interview 20 minutes later, she found Jennifer Mason armed with comprehensive knowledge of her actual behavior. The interview became a confrontation rather than a sympathetic platform. Mrs. Phillips, I have documentation showing that you removed your daughter from school 18 times in 4 months to take her to another man's house. How do you respond to allegations of child endangerment? Amy's face went white as she realized her final gambit had backfired. Those records are, you don't understand the context. I also have copies of text messages between you and Tyler Brennan discussing plans to move to another state and strategies for limiting your husband's access to your daughter. How do you reconcile this with your claims that you're fighting for your parental rights? Amy tried to salvage the interview, but Jennifer's questions became increasingly pointed and hostile. Within 30 minutes, Amy fled the newspaper office in tears, her attempt at public sympathy having revealed the full scope of her deception to yet another member of the community. Jennifer Mason never published the story. After reviewing all the evidence, she realized that exposing Amy's behavior would serve no public interest and would only harm an innocent child. But word of Amy's failed manipulation attempt spread quickly through Millbrook's tight-knit community. Reed's reputation, in contrast, was enhanced by the incident. He was seen as a devoted father who'd protected his daughter from an unfit mother while maintaining his dignity and discretion. The community's respect for Reed deepened, while their contempt for Amy became absolute. That evening, Reed received the call he'd been expecting. Amy's voice was broken, defeated, and empty of the defiance that had characterized their previous confrontations. "Reed, please. I have nowhere left to go." "You have exactly what you chose, Amy. You picked Tyler over your family, lies over truth, and selfishness over Sophie's welfare. Now you get to live with those choices. I'm begging you. Let me see her just once. Let me explain to Sophie why Mommy had to go away." Reed's voice carried no trace of mercy. "Sophie doesn't need your explanations. She needs stability, honesty, and protection from people who might hurt her. You've proven that you're not capable of providing any of those things. What do you want from me? What will it take for you to forgive me?" "There is no forgiveness, Amy. There is only justice. You betrayed your family, endangered your daughter, and showed no remorse until you faced consequences. People like you don't change, they just get better at hiding their true nature." Amy's sobs were audible through the phone. "You've destroyed my entire life. You destroyed your own life. I just made sure there were consequences for your choices." Reed hung up and found Sophie playing quietly in her room, surrounded by toys and books in a space that radiated safety and love. His daughter looked up with complete trust and adoration. "Daddy, will you read me a story?" "Of course, princess." As Reed read to Sophie, he felt the deep satisfaction of a father who'd protected his child from threats both external and internal. Amy would never be allowed to hurt Sophie again. Tyler had learned the cost of predatory behavior, and the community had seen that Reed Garrison was not a man who tolerated betrayal. 3 months later, Reed received word that Amy had left Montana entirely, following a job opportunity in another state where her reputation couldn't follow her. Tyler Brennan had also disappeared from Denver, apparently having learned that his pattern of targeting families came with unacceptable risks. Reed felt no satisfaction in their departures, only the cold certainty that justice had been served. He'd protected his daughter, punished those who'd betrayed his trust, and demonstrated to anyone watching that Reed Garrison was not a man who forgave or forgot those who threatened his family. Sophie was thriving in her new life, showing no signs of the anxiety and confusion that had marked her behavior during Amy's affair. Her academic performance had improved, her social relationships were healthier, and her emotional stability reflected the security of knowing her father would always protect her. As Reed tucked Sophie into bed that night, she asked one final question about her mother. "Daddy, do you think Mommy misses me?" Reed considered his answer carefully, balancing honesty with his daughter's emotional needs. "I think Mommy loves you, princess, but sometimes people make choices that mean they can't be part of our family anymore. The important thing is that Daddy will always be here to take care of you." Sophie nodded with the acceptance that came from feeling completely secure in her father's love and protection. As she drifted off to sleep, Reed made a silent promise that no one would ever threaten his daughter's safety or happiness again. Justice had been served, revenge had been completed, and Reed Garrison's family was finally safe from those who would destroy it for their own selfish desires. Chapter 8. The New Foundation. 6 months after Amy's departure from Millbrook, Reed had established a new routine that centered entirely around Sophie's well-being and his own sense of justice served. The construction business was thriving. Reed's reputation for decisive action had somehow enhanced his professional standing, as if the community respected a man who protected his family without hesitation. Sophie was flourishing in ways that surprised even Reed. Her academic performance had improved dramatically. She'd made new friends at school, and the anxiety that had marked her behavior during Amy's affair had completely disappeared. Mrs. Peterson regularly commented on Sophie's positive development, though she was careful never to directly mention the family situation that had caused her earlier concerns. "Sophie's reading level has advanced significantly," Mrs. Peterson reported during a parent conference. "She's more confident, more engaged, and shows no signs of the emotional distress that worried us earlier this year." Reed felt deep satisfaction knowing that removing Amy from Sophie's life had been the right decision, despite its brutality. Children needed stability, honesty, and protection, qualities Amy had proven incapable of providing. The transformation in Reed's own life was equally significant. Without the constant stress of Amy's deception and the energy required for his revenge, Reed found himself more focused, more efficient, and paradoxically more content than he'd been in years. He'd discovered that justice, when properly executed, brought a peace that forgiveness never could. Danny Torres had become more than just a foreman. He'd evolved into Reed's closest confidant and the primary guardian of the family's security. Danny understood that protecting Sophie was the highest priority and had established informal networks throughout Millbrook to monitor any potential threats. "Boss, I heard Amy tried to contact the school last week," Danny reported during one of their regular security briefings. Mrs. Rodriguez shut it down immediately, said all communication had to go through you or your attorney. Reed nodded approvingly. The school's cooperation in maintaining Sophie's protection was essential, and their understanding of Amy's threat level remained absolute. Reed's social standing in Millbrook had also evolved in unexpected ways. Rather than being ostracized for his harsh treatment of Amy, he'd gained respect as a man who protected his family without compromise. Other fathers in the community seemed to view him as someone who'd handled a difficult situation with appropriate decisiveness. At the hardware store, the bank, and various community events, Reed noticed a subtle deference from men who recognized that he was not someone to be crossed. This reputation served as additional protection for Sophie. Anyone considering threats against Reed Garrison's family understood the consequences would be severe and permanent. The financial aspects of Reed's life had also improved dramatically. Without Amy's expensive tastes and secret expenditures on her affair, Reed's construction business profits were entirely his own. He'd established a substantial college fund for Sophie and was considering expanding his business into neighboring counties. But Reed's most important change was his relationship with Sophie. Without Amy's manipulation and the stress of marital deception, Reed could focus entirely on being the father Sophie deserved. They developed rituals, Saturday morning pancakes, evening story time, weekend trips to explore Montana's wilderness, that built a foundation of trust and love that could never be shaken. "Daddy, Tommy's mom said his parents are getting divorced," Sophie mentioned one evening during dinner. "Is that what happened to us?" Reed chose his words carefully, maintaining the honesty that was essential to their relationship. Sometimes parents can't live together anymore because they want different things. "Mommy wanted something that wasn't good for our family, so now it's just you and me. Are you sad about Mommy leaving?" Reed considered this question seriously. "I'm sad that Mommy made choices that hurt you, but I'm not sad that those choices have consequences. The most important thing is keeping you safe and happy." Sophie nodded with the wisdom that children often display when given honest answers to difficult questions. "I like it being just us, Daddy. It feels safer." Reed felt a surge of protective love so intense, it was almost painful. Sophie's instinctive understanding that their current situation was safer than their previous family structure confirmed that Reed's harsh justice had been necessary. As winter approached, Reed received unexpected news from Lila Cross. The private investigator called with information about both Amy and Tyler that would shape Reed's understanding of his revenge's effectiveness. "Amy's in Oregon now, working at a retail store and living in a studio apartment," Lila reported. "She's tried to contact several attorneys about challenging the custody arrangement, but no one will take her case once they review the evidence." And Tyler? Tyler's had a much harder time. After the Denver incident, he moved to Phoenix, but the information packages I sent to his employer and apartment complex forced another relocation. He's currently in Atlanta, living in a halfway house and working part-time at a call center. Reed felt satisfaction knowing that both betrayers were living with permanent consequences for their choices. Amy's comfortable life as a banker's daughter was over forever, and Tyler's predatory pattern had been disrupted completely. Any indication either of them might attempt contact with Sophie? Amy's too broken financially and emotionally to mount any kind of legal challenge. Tyler's too focused on basic survival to think about revenge. Your message was received loud and clear by both of them. Reed's justice had been complete and enduring. Both betrayers understood that their choices had permanent consequences, and neither would ever risk facing Reed Garrison's wrath again. That evening, Reed and Sophie worked together on a puzzle featuring Montana wildlife. As they sorted pieces and built the image together, Reed reflected on how much their life had improved without Amy's poisonous influence. "Daddy, when I grow up, will I be able to tell the difference between good people and bad people?" Sophie asked, studying a puzzle piece shaped like a mountain peak. Reed paused, recognizing the profound importance of his answer. Good people tell the truth, keep their promises, and put family first. Bad people lie to get what they want, break their promises when it's convenient, and put themselves before the people who love them. How do you know for sure? You watch what people do, not what they say. Good people's actions match their words. Bad people's actions show you who they really are. Sophie nodded seriously, processing this wisdom that would protect her throughout her life. Reed felt pride knowing that his daughter would grow up with clear understanding of character, loyalty, and the consequences of betrayal. As Reed tucked Sophie into bed that night, she made a statement that filled him with fierce protectiveness and satisfaction. "Daddy, I'm glad it's just us. I feel safe when it's just us." Reed kissed his daughter's forehead and made a silent promise that she would always feel that safety, that no one would ever threaten their family unit again, and that anyone who tried would face the same unforgiving justice that had destroyed Amy and Tyler. The new foundation of their life was built on truth, justice, and uncompromising protection. Sophie would grow up knowing that her father would never tolerate betrayal, never forgive those who threatened her, and never hesitate to destroy anyone who endangered their family. Reed Garrison had learned that mercy was weakness, forgiveness was folly, and justice was the only force that truly protected those you loved. Chapter 9. Forever Changed. 2 years had passed since Amy's exile from Millbrook, and Reed's life had settled into a rhythm of success, security, and unshakable purpose. Sophie, now 6 years old, had no memory of the anxiety and confusion that had marked her early childhood. She knew only a life of stability, honesty, and absolute protection from her father. The construction business had expanded beyond Reed's original expectations. His reputation for uncompromising standards and decisive action had attracted clients throughout the region. More importantly, every man who worked for Reed understood that loyalty was not optional. It was the foundation of their employment and their safety. Reed had never remarried, never even dated seriously. His focus remained entirely on Sophie's development and the empire he was building for her future. Women occasionally expressed interest, but Reed's cold assessment of human nature made him deeply suspicious of anyone who might threaten the perfect balance he'd achieved with his daughter. "Daddy doesn't need anyone else," Sophie had announced to her teacher when asked about family structures during a school project. "We're perfect, just the two of us." Mrs. Peterson had shared this comment with Reed during a parent conference, noting the remarkable confidence and security Sophie displayed compared to children from unstable homes. "Sophie shows no signs of feeling deprived by the absence of a mother figure," Mrs. Peterson reported. "She's academically advanced, socially well-adjusted, and emotionally mature for her age. Whatever you're doing, Mr. Garrison, it's working beautifully." Reed felt deep satisfaction knowing that his harsh justice had created the optimal environment for Sophie's development. Children didn't need biological parents. They needed protection, honesty, and unwavering commitment to their welfare. On a cold February morning, Reed received a call that would test his resolve one final time. Amy was on the line, her voice hollow and desperate in a way that indicated her exile had been even more devastating than Reed had intended. "Reed, please. I'm begging you. Let me see Sophie just once. I'm sick, and I might not have much longer to make things right." Reed felt no sympathy, only mild curiosity about Amy's claim. "What kind of sick?" "Liver disease. The doctors say it's from stress and other factors. I've been in the hospital for 3 weeks." Reed suspected Amy's illness was as fabricated as her book club meetings, but even if it were genuine, it didn't change the fundamental reality of their situation. "Amy, you made your choices. Sophie doesn't know you're sick, doesn't miss you, and doesn't need the confusion of reintroducing you into her life. She's my daughter." Amy's voice cracked with desperation. "Don't I deserve a chance to say goodbye?" "Deserve." Reed's tone carried the cold finality that had become his trademark. "You deserve exactly what you chose. Tyler Brennan was more important to you than Sophie's safety, and now you get to live with that choice until the day you die." Amy's sobs were audible through the phone, but Reed felt nothing except mild annoyance at the interruption to his day. "Please, Reed. I've lost everything. My family, my home, my health, my future. Don't make me lose my daughter too. You lost Sophie the day you decided Tyler was more important than her welfare." Everything else that happened to you was just consequences. Reed hung up without listening to Amy's response. He'd learned that conversations with betrayers only provided them opportunities to manipulate emotions and cloud judgment. Amy had made her choices, and now she would die with them. That evening, Reed explained the phone call to Sophie in terms appropriate for her age and emotional development. "Mommy called today. She says she's sick and wants to see you." Sophie looked up from her coloring book with the direct gaze that reminded Reed of himself. "Do you think I should see her, Daddy?" "What do you think, Princess?" Sophie considered the question with the seriousness she applied to all important decisions. "I don't really remember her very much. And you said she made choices that weren't good for our family." "That's right. Then I don't think I need to see her. You take care of me, and that's enough." Reed felt profound pride in his daughter's clear thinking and mature judgment. At 6 years old, Sophie understood loyalty, consequences, and the importance of protecting their family unit from threats. 3 months later, Reed received word through Frank Morrison that Amy had died in an Oregon hospital. The cause was listed as liver failure, though the medical records suggested a combination of physical and psychological factors had contributed to her decline. Reed felt no grief, no regret, and no sympathy. Amy had chosen her path when she decided Tyler Brennan was more important than her family's welfare. Death was simply the final consequence of those choices. He decided not to tell Sophie about Amy's death immediately. There was no benefit to disrupting Sophie's emotional stability with information about someone who'd been absent from her life for over 2 years. Reed did attend Amy's funeral, though only to ensure she was truly gone and to observe which of their former friends and family members still harbored sympathy for someone who destroyed her family through selfishness and betrayal. The service was sparsely attended. Amy's father, a few distant relatives, and several people Reed didn't recognize. No one from Millbrook made the trip to Oregon, confirming that Amy's exile had been complete and permanent. Robert Phillips approached Reed after the service, his face aged by grief and shame. "Reed, I want you to know that I never stopped believing you did what was necessary to protect Sophie." Reed nodded, feeling neither vindication nor sympathy for the man who'd lost his daughter to her own choices. "Amy made her decisions, Robert. Sophie and I are better off without her influence. Will you ever tell Sophie about all of this?" Reed considered the question carefully. "When she's old enough to understand that some people choose selfishness over family, I'll explain what happened. But Sophie will never doubt that her father protected her from someone who would have hurt her." Reed returned to Millbrook that evening to find Sophie playing contentedly in their living room, surrounded by books and toys that reflected a childhood of security and love. She looked up with complete trust and joy when he entered. "Daddy, I missed you." Mrs. Torres made spaghetti for dinner, and we watched a movie about dolphins. Reed knelt down and held his daughter close, feeling the absolute certainty that his harsh justice had created the perfect environment for her development. Sophie would grow up knowing that loyalty was paramount, that consequences were permanent, and that her father would never hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened their family. As he tucked Sophie into bed that night, she asked a question that confirmed the wisdom of his choices. "Daddy, do you think bad people ever become good people?" Reed considered his answer carefully, knowing it would shape Sophie's understanding of human nature for the rest of her life. "Some people can change if they truly want a princess. But people who betray their families, who put strangers before their children, who lie and manipulate to get what they want, those people don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are." Sophie nodded with satisfaction. "That's why it's good that it's just us. We don't have to worry about bad people hurting our family." "That's right, Princess. Daddy will always protect you from people who might hurt you, no matter who they are or what they want." As Sophie drifted off to sleep, Reed made a final promise to himself and to his daughter. No one would ever threaten their family again. Anyone who tried would face the same unforgiving justice that had destroyed Amy and Tyler, regardless of their relationship to Sophie or their supposed good intentions. Reed Garrison had learned that mercy was weakness, forgiveness was folly, and absolute protection required absolute ruthlessness. His daughter would grow up safe, secure, and certain that her father's love came with unbreakable promises and unforgiving consequences for those who would threaten it. The lesson was complete, the justice was final, and their family was forever protected by Reed's willingness to destroy anyone who endangered what mattered most.